Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Wake up, Patrick and Mark. It's time to talk about Zelda intros. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I'm joined, as I'm always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how's it going?
It's going great. Patrick, that was a pretty good Breath of the Wild Zelda.
Thank you.
I went back in preparation for this exercise and watched the beginning of all the different Zelda games that we're going to talk about. And I had forgotten that I played Breath of the Wild with the Japanese voice acting, which is generally my go-to.
Yeah, sure.
And because a lot of times I find the English voice acting distracting.
Yes.
But I had forgot, so I had totally forgotten what the English Zelda voiceover actor sounded like.
I think truly that the strangest thing is that I haven't played the beginning of Breath of the Wild in 5.5 years, right? Almost 6 years at this point. And I just reached into my memory and was like, what do you think it sounds like?
Well, you nailed it.
I nailed it. Mark, oh, no, it's gone. I had a question for you. I had a question that I was like, I'm going to interrupt Mark in whatever he's about to say, but then it turns out it was a compliment to me. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to interrupt a compliment. And now I've lost it entirely. Oh, no, the question was going to be, how many times do you think you have heard our intro music?
Oh, my gosh.
That little 30-second clip of 8-Bit Betty music, how many times do you think you've heard it? This is our 610th episode.
Yeah, thousands of times.
But you don't hear it necessarily every time we record, though.
Oh, that's true.
Because sometimes I go and put it in later.
Yeah, I guess
But you also listen to the show. And then have heard it on times when we're not recording. You've also heard it sometimes when I mess up the beginning of the show and then have to go back and do the whole thing again.
I'm going to say close to 1,000 times.
Close to 1,000 times.
I would guess so, yeah.
I'm just trying to think of what. There are pieces of music, obviously, that you've heard 1,000 times. The Star Wars main fanfare. You've probably heard 1,000 times, right? Maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
Super Mario Brothers main theme.
Right. Especially because
it's the running theme from
the ground theme, athletic theme.
Athletic theme. We got there eventually. Actually, yeah. This is definitely up there. I imagine that this is totally messed with your iTunes most played or Apple Music most played.
What a great point is that I probably have this information.
Yeah.
I'm sure I could see how many times I've played this piece of music. I'm not going to check. Mark, here's something you can do. In lieu of me checking how many times I've played the opening music for our podcast, you can borrow my copy of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch. All you got to do is email us at nintendocartridgesociety@gmail.com and give us a mailing address where we can send you my copy of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch. There may be a copy of Untitled Goose Game in there. It's fine. Doesn't matter. Either way, you play the game for as long as you want. You put it back in the box, back in the envelope, mail it back to me. I've paid for postage both ways. It's a perfect borrowing program.
Here's another thing you can do in lieu of Patrick looking up how many times we've listened to the intro music to our show. You can friend us on Switch. Our friend codes are in the show notes of every episode, and feel free to add us. We love having new people, new listeners to the show. Add us on Switch. We like being able to invite you to games and also just see what you're playing and you can see what we're playing.
Here's the thing.
Good time.
Apple Music is lying to me right now because it says 483.
Oh my gosh, there's no way that's true.
There's no way.
There's no way that's true.
I mean, it's obviously not counting the times that I just silently add it to the episode.
Yeah, that's true. But even then,
we've definitely done 483. I don't know. I guess there was a whole year and a half where we were recording remote.
But I wonder if because before it was Apple Music, you were doing it on iTunes, and I wonder
Ooh, what a
if
great-
like it
ooh.
did, it didn't carry that metadata over.
Right, that's possible. It's also possible that like in making this playlist, it like copied it, so it thinks it's a different song.
Also, maybe we've done less episodes of the show than
No,
we think.
come on. We've done 610 episodes. I'm sorry. Where were you in the people should friend us on Switch? Did you finish?
I finished.
Okay.
Yeah, that was it.
You should also get in our Discord. You need to be invited, but we will invite anyone who is interested in hanging out in our Discord. So send us an email, hit us up on Twitter, let us know that you want to be in there, and we will send you a link. It's a fun, chill place where people are talking about Nintendo stuff all the time, and it's nice. It's a kind place to be. So get on in there. Mark, we have a task ahead of us today. Let's get into it. Let's discuss the openings from The Legend of Zelda. Discuss for the purposes, of course, of ranking them.
That's right. So this is kind of like a two-part exercise where we are going to discuss what we're calling the console Legend of Zelda games.
And is there some wiggle room in what that means? Like, yeah, well, of course.
And, yeah, so we should run down exactly what games we're talking about. But basically what we're going to do, I feel like the intro, especially as the series has gone on, but there are like introductory
introductory
sections.
gameplay chapters,
Yes.
right? We are not discussing the like attract screen or like although they may come into play depending on which games we're talking about. We are really just that thing that introduces you to the world, that thing that feels like the before the game actually happens.
And that's why we're going to end up definitively ranking in part 2. So next
Yes.
week we're going to definitively rank the Zelda intros. But, even in just this discussion right here,
It already sounds like we're not on the same page.
Just what exactly
Yeah.
is the intro to a Zelda game is kind of nebulous, right?
Yeah.
Like some games, maybe it's more precise than others. So in this first episode, Patrick and I are going to decide dispassionately which and purely objectively.
I cannot promise not to bring passion to this.
Purely through science.
Yes, that's right.
What we mean when we talk about the intros for each of these games.
Yes. So we're going to go one by one. Mark, when we're done with this and when we're done with next week's episode, we have to promise that we will remain friends.
Okay. I mean, it's a little unprecedented for us to promise each other to remain friends in the prep for a ranking, but this one could get so heated, I think it's necessary.
It could get heated. I mean, look, first we have to define terms on each game. Like, I think this is going to be like going through a divorce together.
It's true.
Mark.
10 opportunities for us to
for it to just totally crumble and fall apart in front of us.
For the show to dissolve.
Right. So let's start at the beginning.
Well, real quick, let's just run down the games that we're going to be
point.
talking about.
So first we're going to be doing The Legend of Zelda.
And then Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link.
Then A Link to the Past.
And then Link's Awakening, which for the purposes of this, although they are maybe identical, but we're going to be talking about the Switch remake.
Right, and which is why we're talking about it at all. You'll see that the rest of the portable games are not included here. Legend of Zelda, The Ocarina of Time.
And then Majora's Mask.
And then Wind Waker.
Twilight Princess.
Skyward Sword.
Breath of the Wild.
Of course. So there are a couple games from the last like decade or so that we are not including. And we're not doing the Hyrule Warriors or whatever. But these are the games that we're going to be discussing. We're going to determine what their openings are, and let's just start doing that right now.
Yes.
Starting with The Legend of Zelda. This is a tough one because I think you could argue that the opening of this game is 2 screens. It's the screen that you ultimately appear on, and then the cave that you go into to get the sword.
And I think that's right. Like, I think the intro to this game is like 15 seconds long.
Well, and this is also one where I may actually want to pull in the title screen, where just that waterfall, the music, all of that like tone setting, all of that mood setting that we'll get in terms of gameplay in later games is really happening in the title screen in addition to. So maybe this is a 3-screen opener. Title, whatever that is, that overworld and the first cave.
And on that attract screen, if you leave it, it begins to scroll away, and you see all the
Yeah.
different items that are available throughout like the game. And then at the very end, there's a little link holding up a sign that says like, "Please check out the manual for more
Yeah,
detail," or
that's right.
something like
That's right.
that. Yeah,
Very strange. But yeah, I mean, that's so the if we could talk about like what happens in the intro of this game, it is just you are alone in a wide, wild world. You go into a cave. An old man says that the world is dangerous and that you will need a weapon, and he gives you a sword.
yeah. And then after that, you are kind of
Set free.
and can do whatever you want to explore. And like in a very similar way to Super Mario Brothers World 1-1, the game, clearly you can actually, I guess, different from Super Mario Brothers World 1-1. In Legend of Zelda, you can go anywhere immediately.
Right.
But the game really like directs you to the cave because you open on the screen and the only thing that is there of interest is the cave.
Right. I mean, like, interestingly, you could exit that screen up, left, or right.
Yeah.
North, west, or east. But like the fact that there's a point of interest on that screen, and it's only because there aren't any like trees or anything there. It's just the entrance to the cave. And so it is like elegant in that way, in that it's teaching you. I mean, it's the only thing that you see is like, what can I interact with? And then you go in it, and then now you can go into spaces, and you will be rewarded with things like swords that would make the rest of the game is only possible because you go in there and get that sword.
There are some of these later on the list that I feel that, to my mind, include, like a first dungeon or like multiple areas, but that doesn't feel right to me for
No.
The Legend of Zelda, because it like the first dungeon is not really a tutorial dungeon.
No,
It is very
not at all.
like the mechanics of it are basically the mechanics that you explore in any of the other ones. Like it just doesn't feel like a trainer in a way that some of like, or even, because there's not much of a story told in the game itself, like through cutscenes and
Right.
anything like that. It just doesn't feel uh like part of the intro.
Well, and this is not going to be true for every single entry here, but I think just a general rule of thumb for me is that the intro ends when you get access to the open world.
Yes.
And again, that's not always true. There are some that I think end before that. And something like Breath of the Wild, or not Breath of the Wild, Skyward Sword, where like, do you ever get access to the open world? Like maybe halfway through the game, you finally access the whole world. But like in The Legend of Zelda, you get that open world and you get the ability to like traverse most of it the second you get that sword.
Well, okay, so I feel good about that
Yeah.
for The Legend of Zelda. So let's talk about the intro to Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, because
Totally stymied on this one.
but
Totally stymied.
I know, well, because I kind of feel the same way, because there's an argument to be made based on that definition of access to the open world that this one is potentially even shorter, because the game, even if we count the attract screen,
Right.
then you are Link. You are in a room where you see Zelda.
Uh-huh.
Then you exit the palace, and boom, you're in
Boom,
the
open
the
world.
world map.
Yeah. So that is true, and you are in the world map, and that is it's so tough because this game, more than any of the rest of them, I think does a really nice job of like sort of portioning out the world to you as you progress through the game and get the other power-ups. That like by the end of it, you realize, oh, there is this huge world that I've explored, but you're exploring it while it's open very linearly, right? Like you are gated very specifically by into like separate like open-ish areas, but gated by the items that you collect in the dungeons, right? So like in some ways I'm tempted to say that the opening of Zelda 2 includes both of those two towns that you can access before going into either of the or before going into the dungeon, that cave where you retrieve the trophy from, and the first dungeon itself. But that's too much, and the first dungeon is not very tutorially. There's nothing about this opening of the game that like teaches you how to play the rest of it.
Yeah, so you know,
It may not have an opening.
I I genuinely am torn because I
Yeah.
think you could say it is just that brief screen in the palace where you see Zelda, you leave, and boom, you're in the open world. And I think you could call that the intro. But I also, like, part of me, as somebody who Zelda 2 remains pretty like foreign.
Yeah.
It's not a game I have played with you, but it is not a game that I've experienced much on my own. I didn't play it as a kid. The previous times that I had played it before you and I played it together, for like the weird sequels month we did in 2019, it was like it just felt so alienating. But hearing you talk about it and having like experienced it now, I do think, similar to what we'll see in some of the later Zelda games, the game does a pretty good job of kind of like introducing you to the different mechanics of it. And there are so many, unlike the Legend of Zelda, which is, all top down, all pretty straightforward. You
Yeah.
see, what you see is what you get. Zelda 2 throws some curveballs in there. And so there are like a number of different elements you have to be introduced to my mind, before you are ready to go out and you're like really prepared for it, versus what you might expect from like a sequel to The Legend of Zelda. And so to me, it's like, okay, you get out of the palace, and no matter where you go, you pretty quickly are going to be attacked by like the three little
Yeah, the little
overworld enemies,
overworld goblins,
And
whatever they're.
so that's your first time where it's like, oh whoa, this has side scrolling elements and it has combat, and like this is how I use my sword. Like figuring out like kind of like that piece of it, I feel like is one tutorial you have to learn to be able to play Zelda 2.
There's something else I'm realizing here, and you saying that like you get thrown into a side-scrolling combat thing. One of the other features of the intro for like all of these is obtaining the sword.
Except for Zelda 2, where you start with it.
Right, that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. So like if this is maybe an off-screen intro.
Yeah.
That like the intro of this game is when you press start and enter your name. I don't know. This
Yeah.
this is I think the most
one's hard.
difficult.
So we'll say like there's the enemy tutorial, right?
Yeah.
But then you maybe wander into town, and that's your first time being like, okay, this has a town mechanic.
Yeah.
And then now, whether the game does this well, I would argue not by modern standards at least.
Right.
But so then you're like, okay, I am talking about I now understand that I can go into these houses, and that I will get items, and that there's an old man in each of these towns that I should go see.
Well,
Do
and
you know what I mean?
the first town that you encounter, if you are just walking east, right? So like traveling right on the screen, which is a normal like impulse when playing a video game, is to travel from left to right. That first town you encounter, that you can just go into the house where you learn the first spell, which is shield. To you can take more hits that way. That you don't need to do anything before being let into that house. It's not like in every other example you need to either get something for the person, or like you have to have achieved something before they'll give you whatever you need to earn the spell. For shield, you just need to talk to them.
And that's the one that allows you to go into the desert without taking damage. Is that right?
I mean, kind of. It makes it so when you encounter an enemy in the desert, there are like these little rocks flying around. And if you use shield, you just take way less damage from them.
Oh, okay. Well, then, and so let's say those are, again, just if this is the intro, that
Right.
there are those two tutorials, and then I feel like the third one is when you go into the desert, when you go into Parappa, not the rapper, Palace. And that's the third example of like, this is how this is different from the original Legend of Zelda, because now these like dungeon palace things are side scrollers, and this is kind of like what you are trying to achieve. And so that would be I think my argument would be that the intro of the game does go through that first palace, because those are the elements that you need to know to understand in order to like play Zelda 2.
I mean, I guess that is the cycle, right? Where it's like town,
enemy encounters, like going through caves,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
whatever.
Well, like that what you get in the town enables you to access the next palace. What you get in the other town heading to the left, like after you finish the palace, um, is jump, which will allow you to access the next area. Which like already it like messes with its own formula, because you got to do like Death Mountain and all of that in lieu of a second palace. Like there is a second palace, but it's so much later. I don't know. I mean, I could see that first village and the Parappa temple being the intro, but I could also see the intro just being that palace where Zelda is sleeping.
I know. And maybe you don't need the Parappa Palace on it, because what does that introduce you to? And I don't know, as I'm saying this, that I buy it, but like what does that introduce you to that like the earlier side scrolling encounters don't? I guess it's this idea that this has like a definitive end that you're trying to like
Yeah,
get something from.
yeah. Well, so it's two things, right? And it's the Zelda formula that there is an item that you need in the palace and that you need to beat the boss. So, but like to that point, like I don't know, I feel like I'm talking myself out of any of that actually being the intro. Do you feel strongly that um any of that is really
So
intro?
I don't think I see your point about the Parappa Palace not being part of the intro, because this idea that there's an item and a boss at the end of it, like that's all. Well, I was gonna say that's all part of just like Zelda, like the original Legend of
Right,
Zelda, right?
right.
So doesn't really have to. That's not a new game mechanic that it has to introduce you to. And thinking to the future of these, I feel like a lot of the intros go through like
What's new?
we have to introduce you to
Yeah.
this like new mechanic that you haven't experienced before, and this is how it works, and then we're going to set you loose with it. And so I think my vote for Zelda 2 would be you get out of the you see Zelda, you get out of the palace, you run into enemies, and then you go to a town, and once you have that item that allows you to make it through the desert successfully, that getting that item
The
is the end
spell,
of the intro.
the
The
shield
spell,
spell.
yeah, the shield spell from the old man is the end of the introduction, and then you are then like you are given guidance on where to go next,
You
but
know what's so interesting is like I almost feel like you do need to include the palace and then the travel back through the cave, because when you first go through the cave it's dark in there because you don't have the candle. You earn the candle in the palace, and then as you are traveling back through it,
oh yeah, that's true.
it changes the way like like, and I understand it's still the same thing of like the item that you need to get in the dungeon, but like what the items do in Zelda 2 is fundamentally different than what the items do in Zelda. What the items do in Zelda is like it's a thing that you use, right? It's a boomerang that you throw, it's an arrow that you shoot, it's a raft that you ride. This changes the way the inside of a cave
Yeah,
looks.
that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I feel like what is a and I'm not opposed to including that at all. What I feel like is a slippery slope is
Right.
that when we get into some of these later games with much more complex mechanics, like there is at some point where it's like, well, the game is going to introduce new elements to you, and it's not really part of the intro, it's just part
Right.
of like
Playing
a
a
new
game. Yeah,
mechanic
yeah,
that
yeah.
is introduced in the game. But I do see your point that because it is so different from the original Legend of Zelda, it's an element that you have to understand before you can really, because once you have all of those pieces in place,
Yeah.
then you can
Then the rest of the game is
then the
just
rest of
repeat
Zelda
that.
2 is
Yeah.
just like, yeah, repeating that. And yeah.
So here's what I'm gonna say. I think that the intro either includes
All
the
of it.
all of what we've just discussed, or it's virtually nothing.
I think it has to, or my vote would be for the more expansive
Okay.
definition,
Okay.
because
So it's a pretty long intro. It's like
it
a
is a pretty
45
long
minute
intro.
yeah, intro,
Yeah.
including the first palace.
Yep.
Okay. Great. We feel good about that?
Well, yeah, I feel good
Okay.
about that.
Okay, let's move on now to A Link to the Past, where I think the answer is actually quite a bit clearer in A Link to the Past.
I agree with you. And to me, this is one of the most memorable, maybe best introductions in a Zelda game. One, for its like clarity of purpose,
Yes.
but also, I've talked about it on the show before, I am such a sucker for rain in
Oh my
video
god.
games.
Oh my god.
And the opening of Link to the Past is very, I feel like, evocative.
Totally. It's on a dark and stormy night. Your uncle gets called away on a mysterious mission, and then a voice calls out to you. It says, "Help me!" Like, that's awesome. It's
Yeah.
so good. So that's obviously where the intro starts. But how long does this intro? Well, let's just talk through the events of it, right? So what I said, that setup begins, and then like,
Oh, can I? So,
yes,
it had been a long time since I had really paid attention to the beginning of A Link to the Past, or really the beginning, like the minutia of the beginning of a lot of these games. And so when I was watching the introduction to A Link to the Past, so when Zelda psychically calls out to you, one of the things she says is, Aghanim has done ... something to the other missing girls. Now only I remain.
pretty good.
Pretty good.
Pretty good call to action.
Never followed up on ever. What happened to the other missing girls?
He uses them to open the portal to the
yeah, you're right.
to the other realm. But yeah, I mean, it's a great like mystery beat there at the beginning. But then yeah, you're sent out into the world, and the rain that you could only hear before, you now see. And this is the only time you'll see this rain in the game, is this dark and stormy night that opens it. And there are you have no equipment at this point.
You have a lamp, so
have a lamp, yes.
you get the lamp from
From your house.
yeah, because your uncle's like, stay here,
Right.
and then he leaves, and you immediately get out of bed. there's a chest in the lower right hand corner of the house, and so you open it, and there's a lamp. But then yeah, you're sent out. There's no like mini map telling you where to go.
Right. And there are like Hyrule soldiers like kind of planted all around, and it's really just for them to make you not walk places you're not supposed to walk. So you're led like up to the castle, and you can't go through the front doors. You get a psychic message from Zelda directing you to this bush on the side of the building, right?
I can't remember if Zelda tells you to go there, but you are kind of like shepherded towards the side of the castle where there's a lone bush in a very at the end of the path.
It's a very like obvious suspicious thing, or at least I don't know. I've played the game a million times, so it reads to me as obviously where you're supposed to go. And you pick it up and you fall into the sort of catacombs beneath the Hyrule Castle. Already so cool,
very cool.
We're so cool here.
Yep.
Before we started rolling, I was like, we need to keep our editorializing about these to a minimum because that's what we're going to talk about next week. And here we are.
We're doing our best.
We're doing our best. You encounter your uncle, who has been mortally wounded, and he gives you the sword and the shield.
And here's another one where he says, Zelda is your ...
Yeah.
Nothing.
Nothing.
And again, I don't know that that's ever really like followed up on, but is it like destiny,
I think destiny.
fate?
Yeah, not your sister. Like that's not what this is. But then you go through the. So in my mind, the intro is still happening.
I agree.
And then you rescue Zelda from the dungeon in the castle,
which is a good, and the rest of this kind of like section with Zelda is a good primer for the dungeons that you're going going to
absolutely
do in the future. But it is not like it is in and of itself. I would not count it as like a dungeon.
No, neither would I. When it's very linear, you don't have to do any like backtracking in it, except once you do rescue Zelda, then you have to like go back through. But it's very cool the way it like splits up. There's like the castle itself, like the castle grounds, which you'll be able to revisit later in the game, and then there's like the dungeons below. That feels a much more like you're getting the two different flavors of spaces in the overworld of like, here's a friendly space and here's an unfriendly space, even though ultimately the castle is unfriendly because it's filled with guards that want to kill you. but then you sneak out through like the throne room, and like this is back into the catacombs, and then you are like knocked back out in the sanctuary. And at that point, when you leave Zelda with the old man in the sanctuary, in the sanctuary, that's where I perceive the intro to end.
I agree with you. I think that is as well, especially because like you unite Zelda with her father or somebody, just like the elder statesman
Yeah,
that's in this church
it's not her
essentially,
father. It's just
with like a lot
yeah.
of like the music is good. There's
Yep.
a lot of like stained glass, like it feels very uh-huh. And then but then you get like a little bit of info dump where it's like, hey, you get the lowdown on the Master Sword.
Right.
You're given your next like overall like quest, and then you go out the front door and Hyrule is open to you. And I agree with you. That is the point where I would say the intro ends and the rest of the game begins.
And the just I'm not editorializing about
No,
it,
not at all.
but you step outside of the sanctuary and it is now a bright sunny day. There is no rain anymore. Like, oh, it's just like here's the game. It
It's
just
very
serves
good.
it to you. It's very satisfying.
So yeah, I don't think there's any disagreement that is what we're going to consider the introduction to A Link to the Past.
Very good. Let's move on to Link's Awakening, originally on the Game Boy and then on the Nintendo Switch. I think this is a little bit of a harder one, and one that almost necessarily includes the like attract screen, like the opening of Link being in the storm.
Oh yeah, I really like
Crashing
that
on the
kind of
island.
like animated
Yeah.
intro where he's on the small boat and there's just these huge waves that
Yeah.
are battering him about. Then he gets, like you said, crashes onto the beach, and then it becomes the in-engine
Yes.
graphics where Marin like finds him.
Yeah, and then you wake up in that house, and it's Marin and Talon, and you get your shield back right away. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, you get your shield back right away, and then Marin is like, you should go.
Go down.
I
to the
also
beach.
waking up in the house, like it feels very reminiscent to me of Link to the Past.
Yes, totally.
And then you get the shield, and she's like, you should go back down to the beach. There's like enemies down there. See where you like washed up.
Yeah, see if you left any of your stuff, and you have to like kind of travel out through the village.
Uh-huh.
And this first encounter with the village, I'm counting as part of the intro.
I think so too.
Because you start to see the weird things. You see the chain chomp, like tied up outside. Right? Yes, the chain chomp is tied up outside. You pass through the two kids like playing catch with each other. You pass by the library. Maybe you even go into some of these.
Yeah,
places.
if you want to, you can.
But you don't have to. And then like you down on the beach and you are using your shield to like push enemies aside. These like little spiky or sea urchin guys. So you get the sword, and then when you get the sword, an owl flies in.
Well, so first you get the sword and you have to make your way back up, right, through the village. And then you talk to Marin and kind of get, again, like the lowdown a little bit. And then you go to the mysterious woods. And as you're heading to the mysterious, which requires your sword because you have to cut down bushes to get to it.
Right.
And as you're making your way, then the owl comes down and again is like, talks to you about the windfish,
right?
And
says if you have any hope of escaping this, you need to wake the windfish.
And then you should start by going to the tail cave. So again, you're given kind of like a little bit of mission, and that's where I would say
that's where I ended as well.
The intro ends is after the owl talks to you.
Even though we're not including any like actual dungeon and very minimal swordplay in this, right? But like when you enter the forest, it's kind of like you're off the leash, right? Like you can explore this sort of in whatever order you want at this point.
Yeah, like Link's Awakening isn't, it's not like a Breath of the Wild type experience, but it is like a Link to the Past where the enough of the world opens up to you that you do have that freedom. You can get lost, but in the beginning, it's a very guided experience. And so, yeah, I agree.
So
I think
the owl telling you about the windfish as you enter the forest. That's where we cut it off.
When the after the owl is done talking to you and you are set free, I think that's the introduction to Link's Awakening.
Okay, interesting. With that context and possibly with the same endpoint, I don't know. Let's talk about The Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time.
So we should definitely go through the the beginning of the game, but I will say I think that this intro also ends when
With
you
the
are
owl.
with the owl
Yeah.
before you are let into Hyrule Field for the first time.
So I will agree that makes this maybe the longest intro because it includes the entire first dungeon.
It is pretty long. But I think all of these going forward are pretty long, honestly.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, great point. But this one, I think like it sort of tricked me at first because at first I was like, oh, certainly once you get to the Deku Tree, that's the end of the. But I don't think so.
I agree.
So how to talk through the incident of the Ocarina of Time opening?
So one of the things that happens here and happens in a lot of Zelda games is you kind of get the lowdown on context for the world. A lot of times it is telling you about the history of Hyrule, but in this one specifically, the opening like narration is on a dark screen and it's just text and it's the Deku Tree talking to you, talking about how like the Deku Tree is the spirit of the forest and each Kokiri like kid has a guardian fairy except for one, which is Link. And that
It's interesting because you say talking to you, but talking to Navi, right?
Oh, you're is it? Is
I
it
think
talking
so,
to
right?
Navi?
Because
Okay.
because then he sends Navi off to like go be Link's fairy.
But not until later.
Okay.
Because so you see Link as, like, well, the Deku Tree's like everybody has a guardian fairy except Link. And then you cut to Link having a dream, and it's it's a rainy night, and he's standing in front of the drawbridge to Hyrule Castle, and a horse carrying Zelda and another rider like gallops out past, and they cut to a close up of Zelda's face, where like Link and Zelda have a moment where they like lock eyes, and then Link turns because he hears Ganondorf's horse like rearing up behind him,
Right.
and before Ganondorf's horse like crashes down on him, then it cuts
Back
to the
him,
Deku Tree
yeah,
telling Navi
napping in the tree.
that like Deku Tree is weakening, his power is weakening, and that it's time for Navi to go bring Link to him. Because Link, is the hero of time or whatever.
Right.
He doesn't say that, but like, Link is the one.
He's important. And then we get this like first person perspective of Navi flying through the Kokiri village, which must have been mind blowing. I don't remember my first impression.
I don't
of it, do you?
either. But when I that's so funny that you said that, because when I was watching it, I was like, this is like like a tech demo for the Nintendo 64.
Yeah.
Like, what an incredible 3D experience.
And then she goes and tries to wake up Link. Link is a sleepyhead. He's a lazy boy. And then Link is tasked with come see the Deku Tree. But this little jerk is blocking your way. And he's like, you can't come this way unless you've got a sword and a shield. You have to accomplish all these little tasks in the village wherein you encounter Z targeting, wherein you encounter like hopping over little platforms.
Yeah, and there's like a circle of stones and a little Kokiri in the center trying to like lift a stone, just kind of giving you an indication like, hey, try
to
this
lift.
out.
Yeah, and there's a thing where you have to like navigate the blind corners and like the boulder rolling around, and like just using Z to like control the camera. It does a very good job of training you on just like the base mechanics of this new 3D kind of Zelda.
Yeah, it is pretty remarkable.
And then so once you get the sword and the shield, and you're able to pass into the Deku Tree, it opens up its mouth and you go into the dungeon. And I still think this whole dungeon is part of this intro.
I agree with you.
And partly because of how committed it is to the like 3-dimensional dungeon map, and how the like height that you have to reach before like jumping down and destroying the spider web to like reach the lower levels is such a novel concept and so specific to a 3D Zelda, which did not exist before this time. So like all of that, and then fighting the Gamora, is it called Gamora?
I can't remember.
Gamora and something like that. Is another where like you need to use the Z targeting to like lock onto it. and like use your items and all this kind of stuff. It's such like a neat, tidy presentation of like what the whole game is.
Goma.
Goma, there
Goh.
we go.
So I agree with you 100%. I feel like just like we were talking about with Zelda 2, it is giving you the tools for your, Zelda tool belt that you're going to need for Ocarina of Time. And I think we have to count that first dungeon because again, yeah, there's new mechanics that are introduced later, but these core, like, in order to be successful in this game, you need to understand how to do this mechanics are given to you as part of this first temple.
And then the game teaches you two thematic lessons, or one thematic lesson through like very similar story beats, right? One is the Deku Tree dies, right? So like what's happening to this world has mortal consequences. People can die. You can lose things. And then you go to leave the forest, and there's this like some of the characters are talking about like we don't leave the forest. The Kokiri don't leave the forest, right? We don't know if we can survive outside of the forest. And on your way out, you meet with your friend Saria.
I don't know what
Soraya,
the name is.
something like that. And there's like a sad goodbye with this character. Also, she gives you an ocarina, which is another thing which is crucial to the game. We've talked about before. Is such an identifying like physical gameplay part of this thing. It's the ocarina and playing songs on it. But it's also just this thematic thing of like you have to leave home. You have to leave the things that are comforting and familiar and friendly to you to go out into the open world. And that's a theme that the game revisits, especially when with the time jump, and like you have to witness the kingdom's ruin in order to save it from that ruin. You have to say goodbye to your childhood friend so you can save her. It's the theme of the whole game in miniature, right there. So you need to get past that. And then the owl talks to you like 2 minutes later, and then you're out in Hyrule, out in the Hyrule field,
which truly is like I do remember my feeling the first time I encountered Hyrule Field, and it's incredible. It seemed so vast and endless and open to explore. What an incredible moment in that game.
Yeah, and yes, of course, in retrospect, you're like, this field is very small,
right? And thank goodness, because I'm going to be crossing it a ton,
a ton, and like. Do I even have the horse yet? No, you don't even have the horse yet. You'll get him soon.
But I do think that introduction to Hyrule Field is not part of the introduction to the game. Like, I think the owl, I think the intro ends before, like the owl stops talking. You have
the option to have the owl tell you everything again. You say no. End of the intro.
End of the intro.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So just like Link's Awakening, the intro ends when the owl stops talking to you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Of another very long intro, right?
Yes.
And I love that we've got the whole first dungeon in there as part of it. Mark, let's challenge ourselves here. Majora's Mask.
Okay. Before we get into the specifics of what we think the intro is,
yes.
This is another one where I was like, I did not remember the specifics of this introduction at all. Because can I read you the intro text?
Yeah.
We had the Deku Tree talking in this one. This, I don't know if we ever know who's like telling this story, but this is the text that the game starts with.
I love this.
In the land of Hyrule, there echoes a legend held dearly by the royal family tells of a boy who, after battling evil and saving Hyrule, crept away from the land that made him a legend. Done with the battles he once waged across time, he embarked on a journey, a secret and personal journey, a journey in search of a beloved and invaluable friend, a friend with whom he parted ways when he finally fulfilled his heroic destiny and took his place among legends. I think this is so good and kind of tells you like what kind of story you're getting with Majora's Mask.
This is going to be a weird one, they're saying.
And like more intimate, like, and I do not necessarily like, I love this idea that I feel like this intro text kind of paints of like Link putting aside being a hero, kind of like turning his back on being lauded by the people of Hyrule, and is like, no, I'm just going to search for my friend who I'm presuming in the consensus online seems to be Navi, but is never really like explicitly spelled out.
Well, because he's with Navi at the beginning of the game, right?
No, of Majora's Mask, no.
That's Navi isn't one of the fairies.
No, it's Tattle and Tail.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and when Link is on Epona, like Navi is not there. Navi,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah. So I think which is interesting partly because like yes, at the end of or Ocarina of Time like Navi leaves, but I never really thought of them as having Navi is such an annoying character.
Yes.
That I never really thought of them as having like such like a personal connection.
You have a bad relationship with her.
That's
Why
right,
should
that's
Link
right,
have a good?
yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly. But I don't know. I just
She's not Midna.
she's not Fee.
Yes.
But I really like that intro text. I feel
You just made me feel the relationship between Link and Fee, and I forgot how much I loved it.
yeah. I feel like that's such a strong opening text
Yeah.
to Majora's Mask.
And then it only gets weirder and darker from there, right?
Mhm.
Because necessarily part of this opening is going to be, being beset by the Skull Kid, and being transformed into a Deku scrub, and finding yourself in a strange new world, right?
Yeah.
And then being in Clocktown and seeing. Well, there's also the mask salesman, right? Who like he's just like, can you help me find this mask?
Yeah, so in the beginning, just like you said, so you get this intro text. Link is then riding Epona through a forest where it's foggy because it's the Nintendo 64,
That's
but
right.
also it works well for the game.
Right.
And then Tattle and Tail, the two new kind of like brother and sister fairies in the game, they startle Epona, and so Link falls back, and that's when you see the Skull Kid for the first time. And he takes when Link falls off Epona, the ocarina falls out of his bag or his grasp or whatever. And so the Skull Kid takes it and Epona and rides off, and Link is chasing after him. And that's when the Skull Kid turns him into a Deku scrub. And then after that, like they disappear, but Tattle gets left behind. So Tattle becomes like the new Navi in this game, basically. And then you encounter the Happy Mask Salesman who says, the famous line, "You've been met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" And introduces, like this idea and says, "Hey, I can turn you back if you need to bring me, you need to get something." And maybe it's the ocarina that you end up having to get, or something like that. But anyways, like sets you kind of on that first part of the quest.
Yes.
And so that's when after that, you're set loose into Clocktown and given the instruction to go find the Great Fairy.
Right. And all of this, part of the intro.
I think still part of the intro.
I mean, I think just tipping my hand here, I don't think the intro ends until you go back in time for the first time.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I can't remember. So this is what I was trying to remember. So you go to the Great Fairy, you do like the Bomber Kids thing. It's kind of like a multi-part fetch quest. You get the Moon's Tear, and then you wait for
you go to the observatory, you see the moon, you see the Skull Kid wearing Majora's Mask dancing around up there.
You wait until there's like the festival or the carnival, so you can go into the clock tower up and you encounter the Skull Kid for the first time. And then you get hit the Skull Kid with your slingshot. And so he drops the ocarina. You get the ocarina back. You have a memory of Zelda teaching you the Song of Time. So you learn it. It resets everything. But then you go to the Happy Mask Salesman.
So yeah, you like wake up inside the windmill basically 3 days earlier.
And you can now he teaches you how to like take off the Deku mask. And so you can become a scrub or not whenever you want. Then he gets upset that you didn't retrieve Majora's Mask, and he sets you on that mission, and once you leave again, Tattle, which is the fairy, tells you to go to the swamp, and then the kind of world opens up to you, and that's where I think the end of the intro is.
When you step out of the windmill on the like second rotation through the days.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely right. And like that gives you that little taste of like there were things that were about to happen. This town was about to be destroyed. All of these lives that you sort of passively witnessed. You met Tingle. You did the stuff with the bombers, the Great Fairy, all this stuff, and also just like saw people like readying for this festival, and then like the population of the town getting like thinner and thinner as time goes by, and the moon gets closer and closer. Like you get a real flavor for the game and for the 3-day cycle that you're about to experience over and over again, and then it lets you loose. Like that's the end of the intro for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. Now we're on GameCube.
Do you have strong feelings about this one? Because I I think
Yeah,
it's through maybe, and again we can get into the details, but through Forsaken Fortress, and it's not until you've like met the King of Red Lions
yeah,
and you are again kind of like set loose on Windfall Island
yeah. So that's
is the intro.
I think that's right. There was a second where I was like, does the intro also include all of your initial fetch quests on Windfall Island to get the sail?
Oh,
Because then you truly are on the open ocean, right?
right.
But meeting the King of Red Lions and him having that like owl moment with you feels like enough to me that like that's the intro, because like you're kind of doing the sort of like fetch questy stuff on the initial island. What's the name of Link's home island?
Outset Island.
Outset Island. Like you're sort of doing that same kind of stuff before you meet Tetra and before your sister gets kidnapped. Anyways, we've not described the incident happening in this, but it's basically that Link wearing his pajamas, which is great, and you should always be able to just wear the pajamas all the time. They're so good. Lives with his grandma and his sister, and he has this adorable life on a little island. And it's not, he has to get the hero's tunic that his
Right, because it's his birthday,
It's
and
his
on this
birthday.
island when you come, because this game again starts with
Oh yeah, I can't believe I skipped this.
basically like talking about the history of Hyrule a little bit, and how hundreds of years ago there was this hero of time who kept evil back, but that has long passed, and now kind of like in memory, like people still have a memory of it, but it is purely just a legend. And as part of that, like the people on Outset Island, when when a boy turns of age, they're given this green tunic.
Given the green
that
tunic.
is the tunic, like in the style of the tunic that this hero wore all this time ago, and they're kind of like hoping that
The hero will
half-heartedly
return, yeah.
hoping. I don't know if they really believe it, but that the hero will return.
Right. And I love that this is I feel like this is a now a core Zelda idea, right? That there was a hero from hundreds of years ago or whatever. That there's always been a hero, and this one just like expresses it right up front, where it's like, and is sort of implying like some of those other games that you played before happened before this game,
Right.
which I like. Everything else is just sort of like a soft connection or like a literal connection. Like it's always been my understanding that the Link from Link's Awakening is the Link from A Link to the Past. Just like after his adventure, he goes sailing,
Mhm.
And Zelda 2 is obviously a direct sequel to Zelda 1. But like to sort of have this and Majora, obviously a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time. But this is like those Zelda stories, some of those must have happened in the past.
Right.
And they're the stuff of legend, and we honor those legends within the narrative of this game. So, a big Ganon's big bird steals your sister. The bird is being pursued by Tetra and her pirates.
Yeah, and like had captured Tetra first. Tetra falls out,
Right.
and then you have to, tutorialize your way up
Right.
to find Tetra, and then when you're hanging out with Tetra, your little
that's right.
sister
That's
comes
when your
along,
sister gets
and then
kidnapped,
the sister gets swooped up.
Right.
Darn this bird!
This darn bird just wants to kidnap people. And so then you ride on Tetra's ship to the Forsaken Fortress. And then there's like this weird stealth thing, this like stealth dungeon section, which is sort of a tutorial dungeon, but is also very strange.
Yeah, unlike other dungeons in the game. And also, actually, so there are other prisoners, like other girls on
Yes.
the island, which must be a connection to that stuff we were talking about in
The thing
Link
with
to the
Academe,
Past.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. Again, not really revisited as like,
right.
I mean, other than he's searching for Zelda, right? So he's like looking for any potential Zelda out in the universe, right? And that bird picked up Tetra, so he was close.
Uh-huh.
Then rescuing your sister, and uh, then what? You fight the bird?
So no, so you kind of like you find your sister, and then there's no real like boss battle at the end. It's just like the bird just like shows up, grabs you, takes you to Ganon, and who you just kind of see.
Yeah.
And then Ganon like indicates for the bird to throw you into the sea, and that's what it does.
Right, and that's when the King of Red Lions presumably rescues you, takes you to Windfall Island.
Yep.
And then it's off to the races.
Yeah.
So I think all of that's the intro. Even though I think the lessons that you learn in the Forsaken Fortress are not lessons that you get to apply in the rest of the game.
That's why I was wondering when I initially started taking notes for this. I was like, maybe it just ends when you leave Outset Island and you've met Tetra. It's just the fact that you don't meet the King of Red Lions until who is so integral to like the mechanics of the game
and of exploring the open world specifically.
So the fact that you don't meet him until after Forsaken Fortress,
I think Forsaken Fortress needs to be in there.
Yeah, not almost just by virtue of the fact that it's in the way of meeting King of Red Lions.
Yeah, exactly. It's so weird how much stealth there is in that part of the game, and then like never again.
Yeah.
Although Wind Waker is such a weird game, and is so like it's great. I love it. But like it is clearly half baked, right? Like there are big parts of the game missing, and like the more I reflect on it, the more like what's missing from that game feels like notable.
I also think it is notable because there are very few Zelda games where we have these like direct familial connections, where it's like, oh, Link has a sister and like a grandmother, you know, like, and sure, there's like an uncle in Link to the Past, I guess. You know what I mean? But
you
it's
think
just
that's really his uncle?
No,
it's just an older man that he lives with.
Yeah. I in my head canon for Link to the Past, Link was like an orphan.
Yeah,
you know, because something had to have happened to his parents for him to be living with his uncle.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, I think Wind Waker is notable for that fact that you do have those direct familial connections. But well, I guess we'll talk more about it next week, like the pros and cons to that approach.
Right. Okay, so Wind Waker ends it when we meet the King of Red Lions.
Yep. A lot of like sagely characters. I guess King of Red Lions isn't that sagely, but like like stately, we'll say characters.
Sure. Yeah.
Giving you some information and then end of intro. That seems to be a recurring Zelda thing.
And at least twice it's the owl.
Yeah.
The Twilight Princess, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. This is a hard one.
And this one I think is infamous. The intro to this game is like infamously long.
Yeah, that's right.
And in the HD remake, I think they tried to like tighten some of it up, right?
Yeah, yes. Although the gap between my playing the original release and the HD remake was such that I couldn't tell you what exactly.
Well, if nothing else, the Tears of Light they cut from having to get 16 on Wii to just 12. On Wii U. But I think talking about from the very beginning of the episode when we were saying, well, some of the reason, like in Zelda 2, that these intros are long is because there are so many mechanics that they are trying to introduce you to before you can like understand what this game is about. Twilight Princess has so many new mechanics, like Wolf Link, Midna, the Twilight in general, motion controls if you're playing on Wii.
Yep. Well, and when you're fighting the Ing and you gotta like target 3 of them at one time, and then yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
And so I think this is maybe up to like I think you at least have to go to like through Faron Woods and getting the Tears of Light and up to the entrance to the Forest Temple if the Forest Temple itself
I
is
don't
not part of the
I
intro.
don't think the forest temple itself
Okay.
is part of the intro. I understand the impulse because you are still not set on like the open world. But I also think this game has a weird relationship with its open world in that like there are parts of it that are just like cut off because of the twilight, right? So like you maybe get access to the open world like halfway through the game.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think Twilight Princess in general does not like utilize its Hyrule field, like its open world,
Yeah.
in a very satisfying way, I guess I'll say.
And sometimes it does utilize it in ways that I hate, like that thing where you're escorting
Oh
the
my gosh,
carriage.
I hate that so
It's
much.
so bad.
That is, yeah.
It's the worst part of that game, I think. Although then you also get a moment where you're doing the like jousting on the Hyrule Bridge, and that's rad. That's so cool.
That is very cool.
All right, but now what we're talking about right now.
So, there are so like okay, this is another one where you are living in this kind of like idyllic village type thing. There's not your father, but I will say like a father figure who has a family of his own who's like, "Hey, can you take this, like man, I'm trying to remember. I just watched this. Is this like a package or a message or something,
Yeah.
to Hyrule Castle in my place?" And then but they're just like
There's just like stuff you have to do around the village. You gotta
Yeah.
like you gotta fish and you gotta herd these goats. And you gotta like knock down the like hornet's nest and like all these like little things just for like little tasks for the people of the village.
And I feel like a lot of that is and I when I played this game I played it on Wii.
Yeah.
Not on GameCube, but I feel like a lot of that is to familiarize yourself with
Yes.
the motion controls. I remember having a really hard time with the fishing mini game and just
Yeah.
not getting like the timing of that right. And then like horseback riding, that is a huge part of the game, and like the combat in the game later. So like all of that, it's all really important. And then introducing you to the Twilight and this idea of Wolf Link and controlling Wolf Link, which controls different from
Yes.
like regular Link. And so there's a reason why it's so long, but
you
it's
also have
just-
the like the dream, or like I'm still not even sure what it is, where like you're in a Twilight version of Hyrule Castle and you have to escape from it.
Yes. So that's like when you first meet Midna and
Yes.
you have just been so you encounter the Twilight for the first time and this like hand reaches out and grabs you, and then you wake up in the Twilight version of the castle.
Yeah.
And you have to you're in a prison cell, and Midna's like, "Hey, I can, like help you escape if you can trust me," and that sort of thing. But then you learn like the leaping mechanic for it
Yep.
to escape and like combat.
Well, also like digging under stuff, like that's all part of that too.
There is just so much and then you're introduced to the concept of like there's these four guardians of light, and there's a lot of lore and new mechanics and two different links to learn to control, plus you're doing it with motion controls for the first time. Like
yeah.
there's so much to introduce in this game that I understand why it is so long, but it is very long.
Yeah. So what happens when you finish the like first Twilight Realm part with Midna? Then are you just back in Faron Woods
So you
as the wolf?
that's a good I can't
Because you definitely have to do stuff with the tiers before you can access the first
the
dungeon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Forest Temple.
Yeah.
So you
So
do
I
all
thi-
of that,
yeah.
and then I think you are transformed back into Human Link, and then you make your way to the entrance to the Forest Temple.
Right. So I think it's probably just the approach to the Forest Temple that it ends there.
Basically, yeah. So I think it's like you get to the Forest Temple,
Yeah.
end of introduction.
Yeah. That's my vote.
I will say there is kind of an interesting parallel to Majora's Mask with like Deku Scrub Link and Wolf Link, and this
Totally.
like transformation that changes your powers. I think, but again, not to editorialize, I think maybe it was handled a little more elegantly in Majora's Mask, but we can get more into that next week.
Well, I mean, it's the thing that's so tricky about the Twilight Princess is that you spend a bunch of time as the regular Link, and then you are transformed into Wolf Link. So, like, it's sort of whereas the first time you're controlling Link in Majora's Mask, it is as a Deku Scrub. You remember how he controls from Ocarina of Time, but you don't actually have that experience in that game yet. So yeah, like a little different, and also like that's part of why Twilight Princess feels as long as it does. Moving on,
Skyward Sword.
The Legend of Zelda: The Skyward Sword.
This is another pretty long
Pretty
intro.
long intro, but I feel like justifiable. And in not just the same, like there are mechanics to introduce, but there are like gameplay concepts to deal with that you are going to be revisiting throughout the rest of the game. Unlike any other Zelda game, you have this hub world of Skyloft, a place that you're going to be dealing with these people throughout the rest of the game, with their stores, with their weird little problems, with the monster who lives under the island. All this stuff you're going to be dealing with literally throughout the entire game.
And dealing with is such a good way to put it because well, and part of it is just like dealing with in the way that you deal with people in real life.
Sure.
And the relationship is really important. I think more than any other, successfully more than any other Zelda game, the relationship between the characters, between Link and Zelda, like they have a real friendship and relationship before the game, and you can feel the warmth between
Yep.
them. Like
Yep.
that is something
Well, like
that
the headmaster and the antagonism with Groose, who Groose has his own arc throughout the game. Like all of these relationships are established during this opening.
yeah, and I think very like successfully for a Zelda game, but they do focus on the story, and so having this kind of like introduction to these characters is really important, a really important part of the game.
So, what of the like actual what happens in this do we need to discuss here? Because it's really just like Link bonding with his Loftwing, right? And like going through the final test so he can be a Loftwing rider, and then Zelda disappearing into the clouds below, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of a tricky one.
There's a bunch of other just like relationshipy stuff that
Right.
like you get how the students at the school relate to each other, and how they relate to the people who run the school and all that kind of stuff, and the Temple of the Goddess and all that stuff. But like I don't really know that we need to get into like the beat by beat of any of that.
Yeah, I agree. I guess like the important ones that I would say are that you do this like um what is it called? The wing ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And then Zelda on her Loftwing like falls to the like ground below, presumably. Like this is all shocking to the people of Skyloft that there is
Right.
anything like below them. And then Fee leads Link to the Goddess Sword, and
Yes,
that
that's
connection
a
is
great point.
important. And then finally, you go to the surface for the first time to the sealed grounds, and you meet the old one. And the old one again is the sagely character who sends Link out to Faron Woods and like gives him the direction of what he needs to do and what his mission is. And I think that is the end of the intro. So I think you have to meet the
It's
old
another
one.
meeting the sage character.
Yeah, I think you have to meet the old one, and then which is the character's name. That's not me being mean or reductive. And then
I mean, you could say the character's name, but that's a spoiler.
that's right. That's a major spoiler. So yeah, I think Sealed Grounds is an important part of it, but I think that's the end of the intro.
So does that mean that you also fight the imprisoned as part of that?
I don't. You go down to the bottom of there's like that's the spiral kind
Yeah.
of like pit, and you see the stake or whatever it is that's holding
Yeah.
the.
The
But I don't think you fight it yet. I
Okay,
think that
okay.
comes later.
Okay, all right. But yeah, I think you're right. Getting to the sealed grounds, getting to the earth below, that's all an important part. And as soon as you get like sent off, but as soon as you exit the other way of the temple, that's the end of the intro.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Breath of the Wild. Is this the easiest one?
I think it might be.
You
It,
get
like,
off the Great Plateau.
It's like the first one and Breath of the Wild are the easiest ones. Yeah, you get off the Great Plateau. End.
Do we want to talk about the Great Plateau at all?
So, I feel like Breath of the Wild. I don't know if it's in response to Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess, some of the reaction to that where the intros are insanely long. But Breath of the Wild
And insanely talky too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good point because Breath of the Wild is very to the point.
Right.
They're a really minimalistic short cutscene at the beginning with Zelda telling Link to open his eyes, Link's and he's in this like Sheikah cryo chamber
Yeah.
thing, like liquid drains out of.
Yeah,
Then,
it's like 45 minutes into the Matrix. is
yeah,
what it
yeah,
is.
exactly. But then, he wakes up, you grab a couple of items, you learn how to like run and climb real quick, but then you're out into the Great Plateau.
Picking up sticks and using them as swords.
One thing I will, again, kind of going to like the nitty gritty text of it, is that in the beginning, when you're talking to, again, the old man who turns out to be the last king of Hyrule and Zelda's father, he says, quote, "The signs of a resurrection of Calamity Ganon are clear, and the power to oppose it lies dormant beneath the ground," which made me think like, ooh, Tears of the Kingdom connection
here
with
we
like
go.
what we've seen. I will say that he then continues to talk about like, so we started digging and we found the Guardians, which maybe that's what he was talking
Sure,
about.
okay.
But
But maybe there's something
maybe
else.
there's something else.
Maybe they didn't dig deep enough.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and okay, so just like there are 4 shrines that you have to conquer within on the Great Plateau here, and some of them are in places that are hard to reach with your limited stamina, and some of them are in places that are hard to reach because it's cold, right? And you start to take damage. So you can figure out like, do you just need to eat something to like regain health? Do you need to eat something to regain stamina? Do you need to eat something to warm yourself up? Like all of these like survival skills of the game are slowly being taught to you this way.
And it's a good introduction to like problem solving in the game, where it's where you have a lot of choices on how you want to solve this.
Totally.
You want to, get the items that you need so your outfit is different and you are warm. Do you want to cook something that'll keep you warm? How are you going to get across that chasm? Are you going to like cut down a tree?
I think you kind of have to knock down the tree though.
But yeah, like there's like and yeah, it's introduced you to the idea of shrines and the towers but it meters and the Sheikah slate, but it meters it
Right.
out in like a really open and yet contained way because you're stuck on that Great Plateau. There's only so many things you can do.
Well, and the thing with the Sheikah slate and the Sheikah slate powers is each of those 4 shrines gives you one of those powers, and then that's it. Those are the powers that you get through the rest of the game, which is surreal to think of, that like you get the tools so early and they're all like metered out in these very specific challenges based around that specific Sheikah slate power. And once you've gotten all 4, then you can go to the like ruined church or whatever it is, and the old man, now the king of Hyrule, or the former king of Hyrule, gives you the glider, and then the game begins.
Yep. And he, again, that sagely character says, hey, you should go to Kakariko Village.
Yeah.
And puts it on your map, but
That's
you don't
it.
have to.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah,
at that
he's
point.
like, you're probably not strong enough to go to the castle. Go here instead. But you can do whatever you want.
Right. You can leave from the plateau and head straight to Ganon's castle.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's it. I think it's the Great Plateau, a great kind of like introduction to the mechanics of the game, and then you're off.
Okay, Mark, we have now established what the intros to all 10 of these Zelda games are. We will rank them next week. That's going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Remember, please rate, review, and follow us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
And I will say, since we have a week until we're ranking them, if you disagree, if you need to change
yeah.
our minds about where an intro begins or ends,
yeah,
let us know.
Let us know. Also, if you think we're cowards for not including Minish Cap or whatever, like you can let us know that too. We are not recording these 2 episodes back to back, as we sometimes do in a 2-part situation. So there actually is a full week here where you can change our minds. So yeah, write in Nintendo Cartridge Society
at gmail.com,
or let us know in the Discord or on Twitter. All right. I was doing the outro here. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Patrick_Ellers. Mark is at MKE Mitchell, and the show is at Cart Society. There's also a Facebook page, which is just Nintendo Cartridge Society. Anthony DeLuca made our logo, and our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. From my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Ellers, saying thank you for listening.